When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes?
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm Oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish, Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Today, we're joined by Patrick Smith and Melinda Alcosser, who have recently published Pickleball, The Curious History of Pickleball, from its origins as pickle pong in 1959 to 1963. Patrick's memoir of being there at the very start of pickleball back in Washington State, way back in the day. Patrick rediscovered pickleball later on in life, and it was like a buried memory came out. And so they've written this book about his experiences back then and now, and we're looking forward to that. They're both avid pickleball players. We're going to start by talking a little bit about their book and Patrick's story. And as usual, I'm sure that we'll wander off from there. So stay tuned. This is going to be enjoyable. Patrick, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'll tell you. My name is Patrick Smith, and I am oldish. I started out on Mercer Island, which is east of Seattle. And we lived in a little house that is now directly underneath the new I-90 corridor between Boston and Seattle. The government bought our house out from under us and tore it down and built a highway. But before that happened, my father and his family had a beautiful home on Whidbey Island, which in pickleball world is about 10 miles due north of Bainbridge, where Joel Pritchard, the founder of the game that's recognized now, had his house. And when I was a child, my father would come and pick me up at our house on Mercer Island and drive me from there to Seattle, and then north to Ballard, and then north to Mukilteo, where we'd pick up a ferry and cross a short strait between the mainland and the island of Whidbey. And we'd drive up the coast a little bit and land at my aunt's house and hang out for weekends during the summer. And I did that for 7 or 8 years. And we always were playing in the side yard this game that indeed had an old badminton net and a couple of sawed-off rackets and some various kinds of things we knocked back and forth across that net, or more often into the bushes. My family would call it pickleball, or they'd call it pickle pong. And it really was nothing to me until about 12 years ago. So what had happened was we were on Fry Island in Maine, where we would summer. We've been summering up there for the last 25 years. And Melinda's lifelong best friend and her husband were talking to us about this new game they were playing, and they started to describe it. And I sat back and listened, and I thought, oh my goodness, I think I know what this is. And it took me back to childhood memories of that game being played and the parties that my aunt would be throwing, it seemed like all the time to me. Well, I figured out in my adulthood that those parties were actually political fundraisers. And they were big supporters of the Republican Party back then. And the movers and shakers of those times would come to their place and hang out and shake hands and raise money. They'd bring their kids very often, and the kids would play in the side yard and just whack this, by then, a wiffle ball back and forth across this net that was about 5 feet tall. And everyone would run around and have a good time. 3 or 4 years of that in my youth, 5 years of that in my youth. Then my mother and I moved further south, and I lost track of the entire thing. Until 2012, when it came up conversationally in Maine, I had forgotten all about it. That's a little bit of the backstory on that.
What was it like to suddenly hear people talking about this game and to realize that it had started on your side yard with a bunch of kids playing?
It kind of uncovered a bunch of memories that I thought I'd sort of suppressed. Stuff about the family. And, everybody has memories of their childhood that are joyful, I hope, but often are a little bit, a little crustier, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yes.
when they began talking about this and I really began to explore my memories, I began to uncover things that I'd really forgotten about quite a bit. So I had to do a fair amount of research to come back up with it. It took 10 years and 18 versions of this book to finally come up with what I landed on. And the surprising part to me, the shocking part to me, is that absolutely every word in it is true. And this, the course of events and the way things happen in the world. I have a chapter called Our Sensational Conflation Nation. Subtitled Chickens, Eggs, Who Cares Which Came First? And I touch on different things in America that have, in the United States, that have happened. One person does this, another person does that, and a third person gets the credit for it. And what I realized as I was doing my research on this is that indeed, Joel Pritchard and the McCallums and the Bells did indeed formalize this game that we're all playing now. But the germ of this game came from my family. And they learned it while they were at my aunt's house at these political fundraisers.
Well, so history is seldom clean or clear or verifiable or includes all of the stories. So an oral history from somebody who was there at the time is really valuable. And other than publishing the book, without a marketing desire to say, yeah, we started it, because that's the other history is the marketing of the game came a little bit later on.
Right.
And it was important that those people had started it. Melinda, when did you get involved in all of this? And what's the story behind the deciding to publish the book yourselves?
Mm-hmm. Well, hello, and I'm Melinda Alcosser. What Pat didn't include, just as an aside, is the idea of getting pickled, because they drank a lot at these political fundraisers. And so they did call it pickle. And there's some things in the book on that, as well as food and drink recipes from those. I got involved as a pickleball player in about 2013, as Pat said, on Fry Island. And that's when he kind of had these memories. And we just thought, he's a writer, he's a storyteller. And so the idea of just putting it down in print and really kind of capturing it, and then it kind of had a life of its own. So
if I could add, one of the things that Greg mentioned about the verifiability of things, you're right. It's very difficult to verify anything. However, Melinda did find a way to get in contact with one of the children of one of the founders, who then evidently asked the former governor, and correct me, Melinda, if I have this wrong, contacted the former governor, who I believe was her father, and said, do you remember any of this? And he was part of that whole cadre that would show up and raise money. And evidently, I didn't hear it myself, but evidently he said, yeah, he remembered some of these things. And
I think Dan Evans remembered the Bechtel name from back in the day. We sort of suspect possibly that the story of the drinking didn't want to taint some of the politics that were going on. But why it would be called pickleball out of nowhere, 1965 is when the known history starts. That's really the year that people published that as a brand, and Pat's story really predates that. So timeline-wise, this is another addendum to the story, I think.
And I will say, without giving away all the cookies, I will say that my father's parents' family name was Diefenbacher, and they were from the old country. And my aunt had an old family recipe for gherkin pickles, and she made them all the time. I loved them. I was introduced to them. I ate more of those things than I should be green. I mean, that's how many of these things I ate. And the combination of the gherkin pickle, which was served in bushels all the time, but particularly at these parties, they had a really nice mixed flavor with the drinks that the people were having and all the cigarettes they were smoking. And so I think that probably they wanted to sanitize the actual backstory on that a little bit. But it's a fun book, and I do go out of my way. And I'm never going to contest who invented this game that we play, because Pritchard, McCallum, and Bell and all those guys put it on the tennis court and did everything that we're doing today. But I go back to the conflation part of it. Carl Benz, the inventor of the car in Germany, plus Eli Whitney, the inventor of the cotton gin and mass production, equals Henry Ford. And Henry Ford couldn't have done what he did without Carl Benz or Eli Whitney. And Nikola Tesla and Elon Musk, the Tesla car is named after Nikola Tesla, who made all these amazing physics and electronics discoveries. So my contention is that my family, the family Smith-Bechtel, plus the families of the Pritchards, the Bells, and McCallums, equals pickleball.
I thought about that when I was reading your book, as far as the pickle, and I thought, they probably didn't want that in the final story, even though that is the true history. And it makes almost more sense. It kind of builds complexity to this story, rather than it being a flat line of events, to be able to think about pickleball as a time where many people were pickled.
Yeah. And so I was talking to one of our local librarians here in town. They have my book in the libraries now. And they have it listed under biographies. And I was puzzled by that. And so I went to the librarian and I asked, why? And she said, well, most of your books that are out on pickleball are how-to books, how to play pickleball, how to dink, and how to make these shots. There's nothing about how to play pickleball in my book. It really is a biographical look at my family and the development of the pre-game that led up to what it became.
Yeah, that's an important part of it, because nothing comes out of nothing. Everything has an origin story and
Right.
grows out of somewhere. And back before there was a chicken or an egg, there was something that nobody wants to talk about. So it's reasonable that this would follow that course. The most common explanation I've heard in the past, and I hear a lot of people say it, is that somehow there was a dog named Pickles who kept stealing the ball. But nobody who's done any research goes along with that story. We had a conversation with a woman named Erin McHugh, who wrote a book last year that came out last year called Pickleball is Life. And she tells the story starting right after your story kind of concludes with and here it goes. And her story didn't include the people getting pickled, but it did include a lot of pickle recipes. So there's some commonality there.
Yeah. She actually interviewed the grown children of a couple of the people that were part of that. And I seem to recall that it's early in the book she's speaking. I can't think of the son's name, but he was talking about being sort of a recalcitrant child with an icky face, and he didn't want to do this, he didn't want to do that. But finally, when they got the stuff out of the shed down the way and went out to the tennis court, things began to spark. It's a nice little book.
There's a story. I'm leaning into oldishness now because you were a little kid then, but there's a story that attracts me from the oldish angle, which is you two published this book. You didn't just write it, but you published it yourself. And I'm guessing that you didn't already know how to do all of those things when you started. And there was some oldish, let's learn and do something new moving forward that to me says oldishness. And so how did that come about that you decided to go ahead and do all that? Tell us.
I think that what you've described, I don't know if that's your definition of oldish, is sort of learning something new as you're in a different time of life. But to me, that's one of the beauties of pickleball, is that people in their oldish years are learning something brand new and able to actually become accomplished at it, which is rare. It's not usual that you start something new and you can actually improve upon your skill at this time of life, I think. And yeah, we had no idea, just like when I started my school about 14 years ago, from having another school where I taught closed suddenly and parents asking to keep going with this small experientially based middle school that had kids flourishing and needed to continue. We didn't know that we could even be a school. So it's like taking on something, publishing a book. Pat did a lot of the legwork. I kind of tried to encourage him to keep going, but he really did a lot of the publishing kind of parts to it. I had a role just to sort of keep channeling the energy, I guess.
Yeah. So from my side of the table, the way this looks, I can thank the pandemic for it. And I say that because I've been a school teacher myself for almost 30 years in New Haven, Connecticut. And I'm a professional musician. I began performing professionally at 13. I've toured the world and played with a lot of people. I'm one of those hired guns that can read music and can play any style. And so I'm hired to play with rock bands. I play percussion. I've been in symphony orchestras for 45 years, 50 years. And I've played in Carnegie Hall many times, done all kinds of stuff. And I've always had to learn new ways to do things in music. And Melinda has been an amazing teacher for me in that, because I never had good background in ethnic drumming and drumming from West Africa or in Central America or the Caribbean. And she's a master at that. And so she gave me a lot of information about that. Well, I took that desire to learn new things in the pandemic in the music world. You probably have all seen these videos that came out with the talking heads, the choir of 17 people in little squares on your video singing songs. I made those, and I had to learn to make them from scratch. And it was a very steep uphill climb. But in the process, I realized that at my age, I could indeed learn new things. I was never doubtful about that. And I got pretty good at it, actually. And I began to branch out. I used the Adobe Cloud, give them a little free plug here, because they have all this software that is well integrated. And so I used InDesign, which is one of their programs, to create the graphics for all the movies I made. And I made a lot of movies, and they were noticed by the Grammys. They were noticed by other organizations. And I was honored to be, actually, I'm in the middle of my 6th nomination for a teaching Grammy. You never know where things are going to go. Well, when we ended up having this book, after I worked on it for 6 or 7 or 8 years, I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I have to get this done. And so I began to learn with Melinda's help about the publishing business. And I discovered that if you're an author and you pass your book off to a brick and mortar classical publisher, you may never see it again. And they may do things to it that you would never have done and that you actually don't like. And the way print on demand is working these days, you can get around a lot of those problems, and it still costs you a decent amount of money to do it, but you have complete creative control. And so we learned the pros and cons of the big box stores. We learned the pros and cons of Amazon. And we discovered that it would be in our best interest and the book's best interest if we started our own publishing company. And so we did, and it's called Yellowbird Ventures, LLC. And because we did it that way, we are now able to sell our books on Amazon, but also in Barnes & Noble and every other bookstore in the country. And Melinda was in Australia a couple of weeks ago learning about selling Australian travel to Americans. And I am on one of the largest book-selling websites in Australia now. And we've sold books in Europe and England. So it's getting some nice traction. And getting into the publishing was bigger than writing the book. And it took me 10 years to write the book. So I'm a novice beginner at publishing, but I tell you, I love finding new stuff to do and learning about new things. I've been in the martial arts also for 55 years. And in fact, this evening, I'm going to a Kung Fu class, and I train 3 days a week in that. And I've got multiple black belts. And in the course of all that and pickleball and the martial arts, you go to a pickleball court today and you see a bunch of folks that are oldish who are out there starting to play. And I realized watching them that they have physical limitations, not in the fact that they don't have any talent or gifts. It's just that they've gotten a little oldish, and their movement vocabulary is what I like to call it. Their movement vocabulary has diminished over time. So I melded together aspects of Chinese martial arts called Qigong with pickleball. And I'm now teaching pickleball Qigong, which is a movement regimen that helps people increase their physical movement vocabulary again, makes it safer for them to go on the court, decreases the likelihood of injury, and it slows them down on writing checks that their bodies can't cash. So it's a great thing. You never know where things are going to go. So we started with an old story from my childhood, and it's turning into a healing modality that I'm trying to spread among pickleball players worldwide. And I actually unveiled it in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, last January with Melinda on one of her pickleball trips. So that's how we got into.
I just wanted to take it aside for a second because Melinda, you brought up wondering how we define oldish. And so I just wanted to throw that in, that it's came about as we were thinking about what are possibilities as people are aging and realizing or wanting to support the awareness that there are possibilities for people as they're aging. And that we also were feeling, Greg and I, that jumping from middle age to old seemed like there was something there in the middle. And it's all words, but just the idea of what happens as we're kind of maybe pulling together loose ends around the work we've been doing for a period of our lives as adults and being old, what's there in the middle. And so everything that we're talking about today is highlighting the reality that we can keep on going. As long as we can keep on going, we can keep on going. And whatever that means. And that here are some, you're both sharing some ways that you have morphed and evolved as you've done different things.
But what I would add to that is that I'm talking about me. I've got these black belts and I've done this and I've done that. But the fact is, I am feeling the same stuff that other oldish people are. And in fact, for the last 8 months, you may be able to hear it in my voice. I had to have some throat surgery, and recovering from that has been a monumental thing, but it hasn't slowed me down. It's motivated me to actually get out there and do more. And my daughter, God bless her, she said a couple of months ago, when you're feeling like you don't want to do anything or can't do anything, get up, have a glass of water and do some push-ups. And I said, okay. And so I started out, and I lost a lot of weight during this whole process of the surgery thing. And so I was weak. I lost a lot of muscle strength. And so I was barely able to eke out 10 push-ups. But over the course of the last 2.5 months, 3 months, I'm not only up to 50 push-ups, I'm up to 50 push-ups 3 times a day. And so it can be done. And, as we get older, so many people I know have this sort of defeatist attitude, or, oh, well, this is where I'm at. I'm kind of stuck here and blah, blah, blah. And I'm here to tell you it's not true. I can't do some of the stuff I did as a kid, but I can still participate in the things that I like to do at the stage I'm at in my life. And I'm doing stuff with my body in Kung Fu now. I'm actually better now than I was 25 years ago. So, because the experience of our lives, the experience of our bodies teaches us what is intelligent to do. And hopefully by the time we get to this point in our lives, we make intelligent choices about what we're going to do. And so to all of your listeners, I invite you to check out the Pickleball Qigong. You can Google it probably and find it. And try some of the exercises, because it will help you prepare your knees and your hips and your back and your neck to get out there in the court and not get hurt.
We'll put a link in the show notes on the website that can take people directly there, as well as to your book, as well as to something else that we want to talk about a little bit in a couple of minutes. I just want to throw in my 2 cents about the oldish question. And in my head, it relates to the expression that I heard over and over again when I was growing up. you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's true. We're not old dogs, we're oldish, and we're going to teach you some tricks. That's the way I feel about it. So, and we did the same things with, thank you. We did the same thing with podcasting that you've done with publishing. We had this idea that it'd be nice to have a podcast because we'd heard a podcast once, right? Or, you know what I mean? So, and we knew that it was possible, but we knew that iHeartRadio or PBS or whoever else was big in the podcast game at that point. They weren't going to suddenly say, oh, Janet and Greg, I bet they would make good podcasters. Let's go find them. No, it was our idea. We knew nothing. A week before we recorded our first podcast, we had nothing. I got this microphone that you can see in the mail based on recommendations that I had seen on YouTube. And we basically figured out how to do this. We already knew how to talk, so that was helpful. And Janet is wonderful at asking probing questions. That's what she does for a living. It just all came together, but we had to learn a lot. The learning curve, as you were talking about with publishing, was steep. So we learned that. I want to throw out something that really intrigued me reading the notes at the end of the book, which is the nonviolence program that you two are involved in that I hadn't heard of before, but I want to change that. I want to hear about it because coming out of, I think of pickleball as a way to learn nonviolence, except for the bangers, but it's a cooperative, competitive enterprise. So, and I like that. Melinda, why don't you tell us a little bit about this nonviolence thing?
Let me jump in for a second because everything you said, Greg, made me think of, I've written a few quotes from the book that I really liked. And one of them was, which I think relates at this moment. When I see a foursome that spans as many generations fighting it out with everyone breaking a little sweat, but able to compete, I know I'm seeing something special and amazing.
Yeah, that struck me too. That sounds like pickleball to me. Yeah.
Well, we're involved in something called Kingian Nonviolence Reconciliation. And that is a name that really came in 1968-ish. Reverend Bernard Lafayette Jr., who was one of Dr. King's right-hand man. He was the roommate of Congressman John Lewis. They were both the original Freedom Riders. Dr. Lafayette led the Selma campaign. He led the Poor People's Campaign. And literally the day that Dr. King was assassinated, that morning, he said to Bernard, Dr. Lafayette, he said, we need to institutionalize and internationalize this nonviolence, ... And Dr. Lafayette got on an airplane to go back to Washington, D.C. to continue the Poor People campaign. And when he landed, he found out that that his friend had been killed and his mentor had been killed. Although Dr. Lafayette says they missed because he's carried this out. And so he's spent his life, and you can look him up, Reverend Dr. Bernard Lafayette. And so he really has done that. He's made it his life's work to have centers that were started throughout the world and that really are the seeds of nonviolence. And there's a curriculum that's designed to understand conflict and to understand the types and levels of conflict, to understand really how to use nonviolence so that you're reaching a point of reconciliation, which is a win-win situation, that you understand your opponent's argument so much that you could argue it, and that you're really seeing the world through the eyes of Dr. King, which had to do with agape love, which had to do with really understanding the divine in each one of us and raising the level of interaction in that way. So we're involved with the Connecticut Center for Nonviolence, which is one of the centers that was started here about 2009. And we work in all sorts of places. I was just actually working with one of our senior trainers in Hartford, Connecticut, who was once a gang member and he was once imprisoned, and now he's made it his life work to turn people's lives around. And he says, love harder, hug tighter. And he bought a bunch of food and he got people together to serve it and give free meals to people as a thank you, as a gift, as a way. So I do see the connection between this and pickleball in a very big way. I think pickleball brings people together who otherwise in their oldest years would be sitting on a couch with a remote control and now have community and now have a whole new, literally has changed people's lives. So I'm designing something that is taking the principles of nonviolence directly from Dr. King's book, A Stride Toward Freedom, and which is the book that he wrote right after the Montgomery campaign. And that really illustrated his coalescing of all of the different things he's read to understand what his approach to nonviolence is. And so he has these 6 principles. And the second one is the beloved community is the goal for the future. And so it means you have the ends has to justify the means, or the means has to justify the ends. So you can't wait for peace. You can't go out and shoot people so that you get peace. You have to live now so the future is with us, right? And so pickleball has enormous potential for bringing people together of all walks of life. So I'm actually putting together a grant that I just submitted to the USA Pickleball and getting some people in Hartford and New Haven together to learn to play with kids of incarcerated parents, with some of the youth that we work with who are exposed to violence often, and using pickleball as a means to teach those 6 principles. So I really do see it as building the beloved community and taking it to different places in the world and, through travel. It's taken hold.
One of the things about Kingian Nonviolence, an important aspect of Kingian Nonviolence is the spelling of the word nonviolence. I mean, most people they will write NON-violence, but the hyphen is not in the word. Nonviolence is the chosen activity. And as with one or two of us have been in some form of therapy or some form of marriage counseling or some form of couples work. And if you were successful in the couples work, you probably learned to listen without having an immediate conversation in your head about what's wrong with what the person is saying, but just to listen to them and be able to talk back to them and repeat what they said to you so that they can feel like they were heard, like they were validated. Their message actually got across. And one of the things that happens in this whole nonviolence practice is the notion that we're going to slow down, we're going to learn to listen, and that we're going to tell our truth without blaming the other person for it. And so this is my truth. You have an impact on it, but I'm not going to say this is your fault, but this is where I am. And it works at all levels of society. It works at all ages. And I've been teaching in the inner city, like I said, for almost 3 decades. And I use aspects of Kingian nonviolence in my classrooms every single day. And it really just comes down to, am I quiet enough to be listening to what the other person is actually saying without judging them while they're saying it? And it takes practice. And Melinda, at first, she joined this 2 decades before I did. But we've both been honored to know Dr. Lafayette personally and to have met with him personally and worked with him personally on many occasions over the last 25 or 30 years. He's an unbelievable man. And unfortunately, so many of these great leaders don't get any notoriety or any recognition until they're dead. And he is alive, and he's living down south, and he's doing the work every day, even at his sweet age of 80-something. So it never ends, and he is never he takes it easy sometimes, but he is never at rest. So he's a remarkable man.
So one of the things that we're about is communication, and the basis of compassion, which I strongly feel is the way to resolve the problems of the world, is to, if everybody worked on expanding their compassion, and compassion is dependent on listening, because when you listen, you learn that you're not really different from the other person. And there is in Buddhism, if you've listened to our podcast, you hear Jen and I talk about Buddhism from time to time. And there's a bodhisattva who is the bodhisattva of our age, whose name is almost impossible to pronounce in Sanskrit. It's Avalokiteshvara. And what it means it's the bodhisattva of compassion. And what it means in Sanskrit, literally, is one who listens deeply to the heart of the world.
And that is a way to expand compassion and many mindfulness practices, among other things. And prayer and the basis of prayer in Christianity is to work on expanding your heart and listen with your heart and not with your prejudices. And that's the key. So I'm really happy to hear about this Kingian Nonviolence and your involvement in it. That's as exciting to me as pickleball is, which is, I don't say that very often.
Can I add to something you just said, Greg? How can you listen if you're not quiet? And in the meditation that you're doing and the Bodhisattva, the way the name translates, every one of us is connected to something that's greater than us. Whether we want to believe it or not is irrelevant. We're all connected to something. And we can communicate with each other through that thing, whatever that thing is. And listening to the heart of the world gives you access to that thing and to everybody else and everything else on the planet. And when you're quiet and waiting for that ball to come over the net, you can observe the little bit of craziness that's going through your mind, all the messages that are going through. But as you practice that kind of that Taoist practice of quieting your mind, you can just patiently wait for the ball. And when it arrives, you'll know what to do with it. And it's the same in the martial arts. It's the same in music. It's the same in teaching. So, the bottom line here, as I get oldish here and simplify my life and simplify the way I approach things, if I'm quiet long enough, I'll hear what I need to hear.
Yep. And just like music is in the space between the notes, the magic of pickleball is in the space between the thwacks.
That's right. That's right. When I'm teaching music, there's 7 elements of music. There's loud, soft, fast, slow, high, and low. And the one thing that controls all of them is silence. And that's how there's different styles of music. There's only 7 notes with variations. So there's only 12, in the Western system. And even if you look around the world at the other systems, the microtonal stuff that happens in music, it's all in there for us too. If you listen to jazz, you're going to get a lot of microtonal stuff, and it's just not defined that way. So you control it all with silence.
So I just wanted to say that as we in our podcast episodes have talked about pickleball and also just talking among ourselves, I've always been interested in how do you find words to describe what pickleball is for people, what it does for people, what it offers. So one of your quotes in the book is sincere competition, connection, and compassion were all a natural result of this gaming interaction. And that quote and everything we've been talking about kind of brings together for me that this is what draws people to pickleball. That depending on what people are thinking about as they go to play, that the reality in a global, the pickleball experience, a deep way is connection, intergenerational connection, the silence, the waiting, the calming mind, the compassion. So this is a very exciting conversation for me for many reasons, but that is one of them, which is, that's why I think that is why it is growing exponentially, is because it's touching something in us about community, about compassion.
Do you think that it touches the idea of patience? That's such a key element. When you slow down in the game, I think one has a better game, right?
The patient one in the Dink'em battle wins. It's the person who gets impatient that loses.
Right. And the other part too is, like, for me, being present on the court. And I imagine other sports have this, but there is something that, it must be that causes it to have become so popular maybe around this oldish age, but to be able to be present I wrote an article once, I called it the adults playground, because it's like on Team Reach and all these places, like, can you come out and play? Like, I remember, as a kid, having a play date, going out and playing, going over to find somebody who can play. We actually use that word now. You want to go play. And so we're tapping into that sense of play, which is so healthy and so important for staying young and oldish.
I think the thing about pickleball too, it offers yet another opportunity to look at ourselves. And what Greg just said was a wise thing. The person that slows themselves down and relaxes and waits is going to get the dink. But somebody who charges in and is over aggressive with the stuff, they're going to lose. It's going to happen. They're going to lose. And pickleball is a mirror. When you get angry on the court, well, what are you angry at? What are you really angry at? Or when you see somebody do something fun or great, your love for their happiness is able to come out because you're so innocent in that moment. And Melinda mentions presence. Everybody says presence and let's be mindful. What does that mean? For me, presence is forgetting that I'm angry about the past and sad about the past, and that I'm also fearful about the future. That's 3 parts of my life. If I spend half my time thinking about the past, there's nothing I can do about that. And if I spend the other half of my time worrying about what's coming, I'm not here. I'm either in my past or I'm in my future, but I'm not here. And when you're on the court, you need to be there if you're going to get that dink. So I think that for me, pickleball is a mirror on ourselves. And that's why it's popular, because you have that argument and that conversation and that love affair with yourself while you're on the court.
It's a great compassion for ourselves, a great compassion for each other. It provides opportunities for joy that can only happen when we're present.
You can only share what you have. And if you have compassion for yourself, you're going to have compassion for the other guy. And if you're angry at yourself, you're going to express that anger to the other guy. So, when you get tired of the pain of being angry at yourself, you let it go. And suddenly that love is there, the compassion is there, the peace is there. And that's why people have such a great time.
We always ask people that join us 2 questions. One is, what are you excited about in being oldish? And what are fears about being oldish?
Well, what I'm excited about, I think, is the ability to feel more whole. I did my mom, getting to be in her early 90s. And as I think I mentioned, she was very reflective just as a person, as a writer, and would say that age was sort of a state of mind and this kind of thing. And that her book that she wrote, that we're going to try to publish, that you get smarter at 60 or whatever she called it.
You start to get smart at 60.
At 60, yeah. So my grandmother and my mom, people that I knew that sort of made it up to those later years, would sort of talk about how freeing it is to get older somehow, because you're not worried about the same stuff you might be worried about. I'm excited for the now, because I'm sort of really learning about the now and like how that's really all we have. And that to me is very freeing. And the now is sort of this gift. Like, we really don't, worry was some part of my DNA, and I'm sort of learning to let go of it. But I think the idea of still learning, I think finding others that are sort of excited about learning, no matter what age. I look at myself in the mirror, I do have gray hair, and I sort of think, well, yeah, whatever, but the part inside of each of us is this spirit, and that is ageless and that is timeless. So for me, that's what's exciting. And I guess a fear probably is, I don't know what to do with all of this, and what are my daughters going to be doing when I'm moved on, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
what excites me is the opportunity to make real a lot of the thoughts and plans and dreams that I've had throughout my life, and am actually about to gain more time to do. As I prepare to retire from my teaching job, I'm already working in publishing and I'm doing more with martial arts. And so I'm occupying the time now to the point where my teaching job is actually getting in the way of my retirement. I'm excited about that. And I'm excited about being able to, one of the secret reasons that I started the publishing company is because I've always believed that if you're fortunate enough to have had good teachers, and if you're fortunate enough to have learned some good lessons in life, then it's incumbent upon you to share that in a way with the next generation or the next generation after that. And I've been blessed with great teachers my whole life, and I have a lot of information. And so it's time for me to begin to codify that and collect it into something that I can pass on to, the people that are in the martial arts, or in pickleball, in music, whatever. And, this health scare that I had last year with this throat thing, it didn't scare me in those exact words, but it made me acutely aware of the fact that I have a job left to do. Because I don't think there are any accidents. I don't believe that there are any accidents. And everything is an opportunity to get a lesson learned. And so I wasn't doing anything wrong that caused me to have an illness. It just came. And I realized that, oh, gee whiz, I should take this opportunity to really begin to do the stuff that I know I want to do and that I should do. And so I'm not sure that I would say that I'm afraid, other than if there's fear there, it's fear that I won't be able to get done everything I want to get done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that since I also believe that we are doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing every moment of our lives, then I don't need to worry about that, because if I meant to get it done, I will. And if I'm not, I won't. And that's the way it is.
So wisdom comes with oldishness for both of you. So it's a good sign.
Thanks.
Well, for me, this has been great fun. And 3 or 4 weeks ago, I never even heard of you guys before. And now this has been one of the highlights. This has been great fun. I certainly appreciate all the work that you're doing. And maybe we can do this again.
Sure. I'd love to.
I'm going to thank you for being on with us and spending this time. It's been really fabulous. And we look forward to continuing this conversation one way or another.
That would be great. I look forward to spending time with you on the courts. And
Yes.
both of you.
Thank you so much. It was great to meet you both, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. We're very grateful on our end.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. We really enjoyed our visit with Melinda and Pat, and hope you did too. You can get more info about their many projects and a link to purchase their book, The Curious History of Pickleball, in the show notes and on our website at www.oldish.me. Join us next time for our conversation about negative self-talk on the courts and in real life. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. There's a link there too if you've wondered how you can help support our podcast. If you like what you heard today, please tell a friend and rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Carpe